In this video, I'm going to take a look back at Star Trek Generations, the first movie in the series to feature the cast of Star Trek The Next Generation. Let's get started. Released in 1994, Star Trek Generations was directed by David Carson, a veteran of the Next Generation TV series. The story begins in the 23rd century, as Captain Kirk is a guest at the maiden voyage of the new Starship Enterprise B. When the ship is called to help rescue several refugee ships from a space anomaly, Kirk vanishes and is thought to be killed. 75 years later, the crew of the Starship Enterprise D, under the command of Captain Jean-Luc Picard, investigate an attack on a Federation space station and discover that a scientist named Soran plans to destroy a planetary system to return to an extraterrestrial realm called the Nexus. Star Trek The Next Generation was the first spin-off of the classic Star Trek TV series. It ran for 7 very successful seasons from 1987 to 1994. After the original series era movies concluded with Star Trek VI in 1991, plans were made for The Next Generation to take over the movie series. As the Next Generation TV series entered its 7th and final season in 1993, screenwriters Ronald D. Moore and Brannon Braga, who had worked on the series for several years, were asked to come up with a story for the film by the current Star Trek franchise showrunner Rick Berman. It was agreed early on that at least some members of the classic cast would be in the film to help transition for the new crew. At the end of the day, only Kirk, Scotty and Chekhov would guest in the film, while Leonard Nimoy and DeForest Kelley declined to appear, having felt they made a proper goodbye in Star Trek VI. While the cast of the original series had a 10-year wait before making the jump to the big screen in 1979's Star Trek The Motion Picture, the cast of The Next Generation had a mere 4 days between filming the final episode of TNG before starting work on Generations. The opening sequence set in the 23rd century was filmed while the TNG cast were working on the final episode of the TV series. The opening sequence set in the 23rd century is actually my favourite in the film. I have to admit I'm a little bit biased when I say that, because even though I really like The Next Generation, the original Star Trek is my favourite. This whole sequence with Kirk, Scotty and Chekhov as they attend the maiden voyage of the Enterprise B is a joy to watch. It's very well written, with some good humour, and the rescue scene as Kirk takes command and saves the refugees from the Nexus is very well done. It's almost like a scene from an entirely different movie, given that the rest of the film is so different, and rather dour to be honest. Since the film's story involved Picard meeting Kirk, it was clear that time travel was going to be an element of the story. The Nexus is basically a plot device designed to bring the two captains together. An early story idea was that of the classic crew and the Next Generation crew pitted against each other. Ronald D. Moore said they liked the idea of a movie poster featuring the two enterprises in combat against each other. Allegedly, this idea was abandoned, and the writers couldn't come up with a story reason why this conflict would occur. Realistically, however, it was probably because of the financial cost of having both complete crews in the film, and several of the actors probably didn't like the idea. The Nexus is described in the film as being an energy ribbon that travels through space and passes by the Viridian system every 70 years or so. When a person is inside the Nexus, it gives them the illusion of everything they want in life. There are so many aspects of the Nexus that really don't make sense in the context of the film. For example, Picard is told by Guinan that the Nexus can take him anywhere he wants in time, but he only gives himself about 10 minutes to stop Soran and Viridian 3. He really could have just saved himself and Kirk a lot of trouble by going back to when Soran was a guest on the Enterprise and just arrest him right there. Also, we never get a sense of what the Nexus means to Soran. All we're told is that he lost his family and he's rejoined with them in the Nexus, but we never actually see this. The theme of loss and missed opportunities plays a big part of the film. This applies to both Picard and Kirk. Picard is informed his brother and family were killed in a fire, and since he doesn't have children, is faced with the fact that he will be the last of his lineage. As for Kirk, we see that retirement doesn't suit him, and he longs for the adventure of being a starship captain. But as we see in the Nexus, we see that like Picard, he missed out on the chance to have a family. This is where I really have a problem with the characterization of Kirk in this film. We see Kirk living out his supposed fantasy of living in a log cabin, surrounded by horses, and living it up with the supposed lost love of his life, Antonia.
Who?
Again, like I mentioned in my Star Trek V review, this is a huge missed opportunity to bring back the real lost love of Kirk's life, Edith Keeler, who appeared in the classic episode City on the Edge of Forever. This is a character that Kirk fell in love with after time travelling back to 1930s Chicago, but had to sacrifice in order to prevent changes to the timeline wiping out most of existence. If they had made Edith Keeler the woman he wanted to be with more than anything, this whole section of the movie would have worked out a lot better. We never even see this Antonia person, so Kirk's decision to leave Nexus isn't as dramatic as it should be. Besides, I think living on a ranch and riding horses sounds more like William Shatner's fantasy than Kirk's. Picard's arc in this film works a little better. It helps that his family were established in the TV series, and it really adds dramatic weight to hear that they were all killed. Even if you haven't seen the TV series, it works thanks to Patrick Stewart's performance. Picard is acting almost on autopilot during the early part of the film, as he is privately dealing with his loss, while at the same time dealing with the investigation as to why the Federation Observatory was attacked. On rewatching the film, Soran's words to Picard in 10 Forward hit harder when you know what Picard is privately dealing with.
They say time is the fire in which we burn.
This whole subplot comes to a head when Picard is in the Nexus, and in his fantasy world where he is surrounded by a loving family during Christmas time. It's one of my favourite scenes in the film, especially when Picard makes the hard choice to leave it all behind. No matter how real this fantasy seems, it's not real. I only wish the depiction of Kirk's fantasy was done as well. Having said that, Kirk and Picard finally sharing the screen is one of the highlights of this film. I don't think any Star Trek fans ever imagined it would happen while they were making breakfast, but I actually like how the writers subverted expectations with this meeting. Soran is played by Malcolm McDowell. McDowell, like a lot of actors who have played villains in Star Trek, has several loose connections to the franchise. His nephew is Alexander Siddig, who played Dr. Julian Bashir in Deep Space Nine, and he appeared in Star Trek II director Nicholas Meyer's film Time After Time, where he played H.G. Wells, who pursues Jack the Ripper, who was played by future Star Trek actor David Warner. Soran is a villain who is extremely cruel and ruthless. He doesn't care how many people die as long as he gets back to the Nexus, given that he has no problem sacrificing an entire planet to do it. He does have a slightly sympathetic quality, given that he wants to return to his family and live forever in the fantasy world of the Nexus. The problem is that, unlike Picard and Kirk, we never actually see what his fantasy world looks like. He's a good enough villain, though I think his gun looks pretty silly, with that swivelling barrel. There's no way he could shoot accurately with that kind of gun design. No wonder he was such a lousy shot. McDowell is infamously regarded by many Star Trek fans as the man who killed Captain Kirk, and he even got death threats from several obsessed Star Trek fans for this. The irony is that Soran doesn't actually directly kill Kirk in the released version of the film, as Kirk dies after falling from a bridge, though the original ending that was filmed had Soran shooting Kirk in the back, but they changed this after test screening audiences totally rejected it. The android Data installing a chip to give him emotions is a minor subplot of the film. The film's TV origins really show here. As often would happen with the Next Generation TV series, the storylines of each episode would have a main A plot, as well as a minor B plot. This is something that could have been cut out of the film entirely, as it adds nothing to the story, except give Brent Spiner something significant to do. The appeal of Data is that despite his strength and intelligence, he's very innocent, and his search to be more human was part of that appeal. When he finally gets it here, he's not that interesting. Despite a few funny moments, it's a joke that wears thin very quickly.
You could say, I have a magnetic personality.
The writers would come up with a better way of integrating this into the main storyline of the next film, First Contact, by establishing that Data could switch off his emotion chip at will. One minor thing that I found very odd about this film, and I understand that this is very nitpicky, is the use of the uniforms of the TNG series and the then current TV spin-off Deep Space Nine. The TNG uniforms had primary colours of red, blue and gold, with black on the shoulder area, and the DS9 uniforms had the opposite. In this movie, the Enterprise crew wear a mix of both, and no one settles into one or the other, often changing uniform style from scene to scene. I just find it a bit odd and distracting, and can't understand why they suddenly decided to do this. The big action highlight of the movie is the destruction of the Enterprise, and the saucer sections crash onto Viridian Tree. It seems odd that they would do this in the Next Generation's first movie, but despite the writers' reasoning that they did this so it would be fun, it had to happen for more practical reasons. The Enterprise D was designed specifically for the television format, and was better for future TNG movies to have an all-new ship design for the movie series. The movie basically redresses sets used in the TV series, and makes use of stock footage to keep costs down. I'll talk more about this in my First Contact review, but I much prefer the Enterprise E as a starship. Also, the interior scenes have more cinematic lighting compared to the bright lighting needed for television. The crash itself is extremely well done. It looks like they blew most of their budget on it. Even today, over 25 years after the film's release, it holds up thanks primarily to the use of models rather than CGI. It even looks better, in my opinion, than the Enterprise's destruction in 2016's Star Trek Beyond. It's a shame though that they cut costs by using stock footage of the exploding bird of prey from the previous movie, Star Trek VI. Maybe they shouldn't have used up their budget for filming at sea for that pointless holodeck scene near the beginning. The final fight involves Picard and Kirk using the Nexus to travel back in time to stop Soran launching the missile into the Viridian Star to save the whole system. Again, this really doesn't make sense, but whatever. It's exciting enough, and it's good to see Kirk back in action for one last fistfight in the franchise. Soran may have beaten Picard earlier, but he's no match for Kirk Fu. Soran dies when the missile blows up in his face, and Kirk meets his end after falling from a metal bridge. As hard as this is to watch, Kirk did save hundreds of millions of people, so it's not the worst way to go out. Kirk's death is easily one of the most emotional moments of the whole franchise, and the true end of an era. Shatner gives a great performance here, and in a way, it ties back to what he said in Star Trek V.
I've always known I'll die alone.
Interestingly, several years later, William Shatner wrote a series of novels that resurrected Kirk, but these books are not officially recognised as canon by Paramount. Fans often refer to these books as part of the Shatnerverse. There are several themes running throughout generations, some of which are very similar to Wrath of Khan, such as aging, new beginnings, and yearning for past glories. But for me, the main message of the film is summed up by Picard himself at the very end.
What we leave behind is not as important as how we've lived.
Overall, Star Trek Generations is a very flawed movie, but does have its merits. The movie was very much a transitional one, having to service two different casts, and suffers from very weak writing, which in fairness was probably a result of an overworked production, having just finished a major TV series and shooting a movie pretty much at the same time. The film could definitely have used a larger budget and more development time to iron out its script problems. For me personally, it's a movie I liked a lot when I first saw it, but it's gone down my rankings over time. I consider it the weakest of the Next Generation films, but it's not a bad movie by any means. The Next Generation crew will return 2 years later in their first truly solo cinematic adventure, Star Trek First Contact. And that's what I'll be taking a look at next time. Thanks so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, then please hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't done so already, click the bell for notifications, and let me know in the comments, who do you think was the better captain, Kirk or Picard? I hope you all look after yourselves, and I'll see you all in my next video. Bye for now.